Welcome to Honest Money, your best guide to financial freedom. I'm Warren Ingram, the author of a few best-selling books, and I'm also an award-winning financial planner, and I've helped thousands of people on their journey to financial freedom. I'm not here to tell you what to do, but I am here to share my experience and the best ideas that I've learned, and I hope these ideas help you on your journey to financial freedom. Welcome to Honest Money. Today is an interesting episode for us because we had an email from one of our regular listeners, Jen, and she was asking us to talk a little bit more about wills and especially just to understand what a will is, how do they work, what are the costs of wills, what are these things called executors. So I thought it's really important to get an expert in the field to come in and chat to us about this. So welcome, George Robertson from Galileo Advisory Services. Thanks so much for joining us.
How's it, Warren? It's great to be part of the show.
So George, I think honest money is always about education at the start. So let's go right back to step one. What is a will?
Yeah, Warren, a will is a written document that specifies how your assets and your estate must be distributed on your death. So what happens after you die? It specifies the assets and in what percentages or what assets must be distributed to which people or which organizations.
Okay, and so just for someone like me, that means if I want to know that my wife's going to get inherit my belongings, my share of the house, although she says it's her house already, then I need to write that down somewhere. It needs to be in a proper format. So there's a specific way that it must be written, and there must be a few legal things that need to be taken care of. But then that makes sure that my assets go from my life and my estate to my wife in the way that I want it to happen, without someone else deciding on the side how they think it should happen.
Yeah, for sure, Warren. And there's a lot of formalities, of course. So it has to be written down, as you said. It must be, signed on each page. You need independent witnesses to witness the document. So there's specific formalities that you have to follow. But for sure, you need to specify that in the written document and specify that your property will be left to your spouse on your demise.
Now, one of the things I notice with wills is that people often neglect to think about their children in the will, and not saying that they ignore that the money must go to their children. They're generally pretty good with the financial part of this, but they often neglect the part about who looks after children, especially if the children are young. And so, for someone who's got, let's say a husband and wife and they've got young children, I always think it's a great idea in the will to actually specify the names of the people that you want to take responsibility for your children if both mom and dad pass away. Is that something that you would recommend?
Very important, Warren. Yeah, when you look at children, there's a lot of components that you need to incorporate into your will. You have to specify who the guardians would be, who the new parents of the children would be if both parents pass away, or when both parents pass away and the children are under the age of 18. And then you also need to specify, you have to make provisions for different circumstances, because both spouses can pass away. You can leave it to your wife, but what if your wife predeceases you or pass away simultaneously with you? Then it has to go to the children. And if they're minor, you also need to make certain provisions in the will to ensure, that it's paid into a testamentary trust, at least to prevent the funds from going to the guardian's fund. So there's a specific structure that you need to incorporate when you have minor children specifically. You have to establish a trust in your will to ensure that the funds, when it goes to the children, that it's paid within this trust, and then trustees would be appointed to administer it for the kids. If you don't do that, the funds going to the children would go to the guardian's fund, which is a government fund. And then the guardians would have to apply for access to that funds, for the maintenance needs of the minor children.
And that's a nightmare. I mean, so now we're relying on government departments and government officials to pay out money that was actually mine, for example, for the benefit of my children. And I assume that we've got all these concerns around governments and the like. That doesn't sound like a solution for me. So it's critical to actually set that up properly.
Very, very, very important one.
So who needs a will?
Yeah, I think anybody with assets. If you have assets to transfer, you need a will. So if you have assets, any form of assets, it doesn't have to be immovable property. It can be movable assets as well. If you have assets which is in your name, it needs to be transferred to someone else when you die. So when you have assets, you need to specify a will.
So someone that's finished high school, maybe started work and they've got a little pension fund and they bought their first car, but they've got nothing else. They still stay at home. In most instances, people like that would say to me, I don't need a will. I've got nothing. The bank owns my car actually. But to me, I think that's still someone who needs a will.
Yeah, Warren, there's assets and, an executor must be appointed to transfer those assets. So a very simplistic will is then a good idea just to complete. Even if you have a couple of bits and pieces in the house, it's a good idea to complete a will.
And then how much does a will cost? Is it something that we should be paying for? Is it something we go to the local stationers and go and buy one off the shelf, literally? Or, how does this work?
You can buy it off the shelf. We obviously don't recommend that. But it depends on who you approach. Some people do it for you for free if they get the executorship appointment. Other companies, when you approach them, you've got to pay a fee for that. So just make sure that you approach, a professional company, that has the necessary experience that in drafting wills, and of course also experience in the administration of the estate. We feel that, if you don't administer estate, you can't draft a document that leads to the administration of the estate. So approach someone with experience. Some people charge for it, other people throw it in for free if you're willing to appoint them as an executor. So it depends in the industry, but get a professional person to assist or company to assist.
And what's the kind of the range for, let's just say, a reasonably simple will? What's the kind of price that let's say not a specific random amount, but rather a range of prices that someone should be happy to pay? It's always interesting. Now, I don't know, should a will cost me, $10, $100, 5,000 Rand? If I've got a simple life, how much should I be expecting to pay?
Yeah, if you have to prepare a simple will, anything, between 800 Rand and 2,000 bucks, I would say is sort of the market price for a will.
Okay. And then you brought up this this concept of an executor. So I think it's important for us just to talk about what an executor is, and then who that person should be.
Yeah, the executor, Warren, is the person or organization who's responsible to administer your estate after your death. So there's a specific process that you follow. You need to approach the master of the High Court, get a letter of executorship, and then there's a administration procedure that you follow with advertising, with preparing liquidation and distribution accounts. So it's essentially the person or the organization who's responsible to wind up your estate, to administer it and actually to transfer the assets to the people or organizations that you've mentioned in your will.
So, I've been party to quite a lot of these kinds of winding up of estates over my time advising people from an investment point of view. And I think the important thing there is to understand that executor basically takes the place of the person who's passed away. They almost stand for the person who's passed away, and they take responsibility for paying the accounts, settling the debts, paying the taxes and all of that stuff. And so, to me, it's quite a critical role when you're appointing someone to be the executor of your estate. It's not something where you say, that mate of mine's a good friend, and I think he has a gift. I'm going to appoint them as the executor of my estate. I think, in fact, it's a heck of a burden that you put onto somebody if you ask them to do that job. So, just generally, if I've looked at this in the past, the two ways that I think it works well is either that you appoint someone who is financially literate, financially astute, and you say to them, look, I'd like you to be the executor of my estate, but then what you're free to do is go and appoint a firm to actually do the administration, do the winding up of the estate, so that you don't leave it to someone to do all the work as well. And the alternative to that is then to say, I'm going to actually appoint in my will a professional executor, someone that actually does the winding up of estates for a living, and make sure that they do the job correctly. And to me, I think the idea of a free will is always bothersome. If I look at a lot of the banks do that. They'll say, we'll give you a will for free as long as you appoint us as the executors. And the issue there is, dealing with a master's office. I know I'm not going to ask you to comment on that because that'll get you into trouble, but I'll say it. The master's office is a nightmare. To wind up an estate is a huge process and massively delayed now. And and that the lack of kind of government service is absolutely clear in a master's office. So if you've got an inefficient government department, the last thing you want is an inefficient estates department dealing with an inefficient government department. Ideally, try and find somebody that's highly efficient, highly proficient at sorting out an estate, and then they at least can limit the delays on the master's office. Unfortunately, are going to be. I think, is it fair to say it takes somewhere around 1 to kind of 3 years to wind up a simple estate nowadays?
1 year, Warren, is a good benchmark. If you manage to do it under a year, and I'll repeat that after you because it is a fact. It is a challenge at the master's office. We've got experience about that on a daily basis. So you look at pretty much something to a year. If there's some complexities or some uncertainties or some assets that needs to be liquidated, it could take a bit longer. But you look at about anything from 9 months, I guess, to 2 years to go through that administration process. And if I can maybe comment on the executorship, yes, I agree with you, Warren. A person that with some financial background is a good idea. You could then approach a company that has the experience or has an estate department and with the necessary experience to manage it, and then agree a fee with them. Or if you appoint a professional company, agree a fee with them, put that into your will. And then there's also a third option that we often do is we take joint appointments. Like for instance, our company would take a joint appointment with your spouse, because your spouse is not in the position, with the experience and obviously with the grief process going through after your death to fulfill that responsibility. But then at least she's also involved in the process, and she signs off and she also has some responsibility. And then she's also, as they say, in the loop with the process.
Okay, that's great. I didn't really think about that before. So in terms of wills, is there anything that's critical for people to know, important points that often get missed?
Yeah, Warren, I would say with the will, the most important thing is, it's got to be, as simplistic as possible. You've got to understand what you write in that document. There's a lot of fancy structures that you can incorporate into your will. So our house view is also is always to keep it as simple as possible, because if it's simplistic, it's easy to administer, and then there could be no uncertainty. And then the other major important thing, which we've touched on, is if you have minor children, make sure to make, provision for the establishment of that trust within your will. Because, having the funds end up in the guardian's fund as a government fund, is for reasons we all know not a good idea. Now you can appoint proper trustees and you can ensure that the funds would be managed properly for your minor children for their education and maintenance needs. So I think that's the two main points that I would, focus on.
And if my 2 cents worth at the end of this is make sure that if you are over 18 years old, you have a will. Don't think that you shouldn't have a will. Make sure that you look at that will at least every 2 or 3 years. And it's especially important if for example, you've got married, you've got divorced, you've got children, because those major life events are critical to make sure that you've covered those in your will as well. And especially, a lot of parents, I've noticed they're really good with the first child, but by the time they have their second or third children, they've often forgotten about the will. I guess they're busy, and that could lead to some really bad unintended consequences for child number 2 and 3. So make sure that you're always looking at that, as I say, every 2 or 3 years or every time a major life event happens. And then certainly it's not, George won't say it, but my view, pay someone to do your will, make sure that it's professional. Free wills are very expensive later in life. And I haven't seen those work out well in my experience. So I think, on that note, we're going to wrap up. I see we're running out of time and the producers are going to cut us off soon, George. So thanks so much for joining us. And we look forward to chatting to you again.
Thank you very much, Warren. It was great to be part of it. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Honest Money. If you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to me on Twitter. My handle is @WarrenIngram. Don't forget to subscribe. We're on Spotify and Apple Podcast. Chat soon.